All right, guys. So you're in for a treat today. Today's conversation is a really, really important one. It's all about body positivity and the unlearning of diet culture. And I'm going to be joined today with Kierstin Gant. She is a social worker. She is a coach. She is a yoga instructor. She's a mama. And she's going to be speaking from this place of looking at our mental health and what it means to truly show up not only for ourselves, but as a parent as well, and rewrite the story around the relationship that we have with our bodies and the relationship we have to buying into the whole diet culture thing. This is a really important conversation for today. So plug in, make sure that you follow us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and Google Play as well. Make sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and without further ado, I invite you to join us for today's conversation on body positivity and unlearning so much of the toxic diet culture, and honestly, what to do about it, especially as a parent. Okay, and now we are recording, which is perfect because otherwise you and I could just have conversations all day long. And now we're letting everybody in on the conversation. So I'm very excited to be welcoming the fabulous and wonderful Kierstin Gant with me today. And we're going to be diving into really what it means to go from fear to fierce, right? In our wellness, in the way that we live our life, in what we make choices around, and especially how we show up as a parent, because that's a transition too. And how we show up and be that person for our kids. But Kierstin, yeah, you're here.
Hi, thank you. I'm so grateful to be here with you today. Really. Awesome. It's been a minute. It's been a minute since we've chatted live. So
it's been a minute. And for everybody who's listening, Kierstin is also one of the graduates of our Life and Leadership Coach Training Program. So you graduated a year ago, right?
It's been a year.
It's been a year. And let me just tell you, like, grass has not grown under Kierstin's feet in a year. Between you have multiple businesses, you also have a podcast as well. Like, you wear so many hats. She's very visible on all the socials. So I'm curious, like, for you, what took you from fear to fierce? Because you owning your power and having all these businesses and having your own podcast, like, that wasn't your normal a year ago.
No, it definitely was not my normal. And, I hear often, and I believe in this, is like the pandemic pivot definitely led to a lot of my pandemic resume that you were just talking about owning fearNOT coaching and completing the teacher training with you, the coach training. And then I also did IIN, integrative nutrition, right after I finished with you. And fear, I just realized how present fear is every single day. And we can have fear and still do the thing, right? So once I stopped trying to get rid of fear and own it and embrace it, I was like, oh, well, actually, fear is the thing that's starting the fire for me. And I'll backtrack a little bit because I don't believe that there's any coincidences. And I wholeheartedly believe that, my childhood and my past all led me to where I am right now with health coaching. So I honestly can't really remember a time where I wasn't thinking about food, thinking about my body, and thinking about health and wellness, right? And I may have termed it differently when I was little, but looking back, I was an athlete, I was a gymnast, I was a cheerleader. I maybe didn't eat like the best foods in air quotes. And though I was always thinking about what I should be eating, what I shouldn't be eating. I tried every fad diet, like from 14 to my late 20s. I tried every fad diet. that there was. You name it, I've tried it. And I also didn't eat for a long time. Like disordered eating was very present in my life, along with feeling like that was a way of being healthy, because that's what diet culture tells us. And it feeds on our insecurities. And so then I became pregnant. And when I got pregnant, it was the first time that I actually paused and realized what a miracle my body actually is. Like, it was my first steps in having respect and appreciation for my body. And then fast forward, then I have my daughter, and I had shifted in my thinking around how to nourish my own body because I wanted to nourish Lila. And then there was a defining moment with her when I was sitting in the mirror, and I don't know, she probably wasn't even one yet. I have the picture. And I was putting makeup on for my first girls' night out in forever, and putting on makeup. And I like to sit in front of the mirror, spread all the makeup out, play all the music, have a jam session. And she was sitting next to me.
Right.
And initially I was like, oh, this is so cute. Like, this is what I used to do with my girls. Now my daughter's here. This is fabulous. And then she picked up the lipstick and was like modeling me in the mirror. And I just had like this halt of like, oh shit. I had these flashbacks of like trying on 20 outfits and never liking what I put on, asking if I looked fat, never feeling like I didn't look skinny enough to go out. The years of the negative comments that me and my girlfriends would like communicate about, is do I have fat over my bra? Like, all of it just came flushing in. And I was like, nope, I would never say this to my daughter, and I'm not going to say this again. And that really was the true pivot in let me learn what healthy actually means to me, not what anybody else has told me it is.
Right. And how powerful, to be able to have that realization. I remember even with Phoebe, I remember two things in particular that really shifted my body positivity and my conversation around my body. And first was giving birth. And I'm like, giving birth, and I'm doing the darn thing. And I just made a deal with my body. I was just like, hey, listen, if you get me through this and we don't die, I will never be talking shit on you again. And, and I was like, all right, well, I'm making deals just to like survive. And it was just like one of those things that had come over me. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, I guess I got to hold up my end of the deal. And what does that actually look like? Because it's hard to know what that looks like, because I had spent so much of my life the same with a negative conversation around my body. So holy crow, if I'm to hold up my end of this deal, then that means that I have to have a positive conversation with my body, but I don't know what that looks like. Right. Because it wasn't modeled for me. Even with my own mom, I remember her when I was growing up, her always on a diet, like always like the slim fast. And, does my butt look as big as that lady's? I mean, like all of that stuff. And while we think like, oh, that's so disordered, or that's so bad, like it's very popular in our American culture.
Very popular. I remember my mom always talking about crow's feet. And like, as a teenager, I wanted all the eye creams.
Isn't that funny?
But yeah. And you're right. It's so popular, and we're always doing the best that we can with what we have in that moment. And so that was huge for me, because when I decided that I was not going to live negative body shaming and disordered eating, it was like the all or nothing thinking that goes along with diet culture was so prevalent for me. So how could I find the balance between well, I do still want to work out. I do still want to nourish my way in my body so that it thrives. And I do still want to feel good. And I want to look in the mirror and feel confident. And how do I do that without being to one extreme of anti-diet culture, and the other extreme of perceptions of what body positive means.
Right.
So
right.
that finding that balance for me in my own journey of wellness and body positivity is really how fearNOT was born.
I love that. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and how do we switch that conversation? Because if we've had one conversation one way, and I was actually talking to a friend of mine the other day, and I said, yeah, we were talking about, let me back the train up on all my little stories here, but we were talking about doing a photo shoot, and a group of friends in the photo shoot. And then I said, well, I'll be in it and she'll be in it, but I don't know if she's going to want her picture taken. And so the friend of mine is a guy, and he said, well, why not? And I was like, you don't know about this. It's like, sometimes women don't want to have their picture taken. And he's like, well, why not? And it goes to a conversation that we have about the way that we think that we look. And as our bodies transition and they change or we age, like, it could be a battlefield. And his eyes were like wide open to this. It's like, oh, that's really interesting. I haven't thought about that. But Kierstin, what I'm curious about is, like, if we want to have a different relationship with our body, and we want to have a different conversation with our body, and frankly, be modeling that for our kids, how do we make the switch when we've had such a negative conversation for so long?
Yeah. So that's definitely a two-part answer. I'll start with, how do we as the parents and as mom and as women shift the conversation that we have in the narrative? And there's no quick fix, right? And the only quick fix I'll dare to say is that we trust that our innate knowing and our body knows exactly what to do, that we actually don't have to figure anything out. And it's an unlearning. We don't need to learn anything else. We need to unlearn all the messages and all the stories that we've used along the way. And it doesn't mean that our narratives or our stories are bad. They're not wrong. It's just now being aware of them. I'll use an example, like food rules. Can only eat half a banana, only eat berries because they're low in sugar. Bread, forget bread. Don't have pasta. Have to eat 1,200 calories. Like, I had so many food rules, and I could beat myself up or blame or feel guilt or shame for all the things, all the time that I spent on that. Or I can just pause and know that I have a choice in what I do in this moment. So it's just like a huge unlearning, and getting present to our thoughts, getting present to our emotions. That's the other big one here. How many times have you said, whether out loud or to yourself, that food is good or bad, and made it mean that you're good or bad, or reward yourself or punish yourself based off of what you've eaten? Well, food isn't a moral issue. It's just not. Like, you're not good or bad based off of what you eat. Or how many times have you looked in the mirror and said, I feel skinny, or, oh, I feel fat? Well, fat and skinny aren't a feeling, right? So we have to get present to our thoughts, what we make them mean, then know our emotions. We've been taught to control our emotions or hide our emotions, which really leads to mislabeling our emotions, like skinny and fat. It's not an emotion. So know what your emotions are around it.
Right.
Now, modeling it.
Right.
Modeling it for the kids, it's the same thing. I I remember, at the beginning of this, I was so focused on like, well, Lila's never going to see me do all the behaviors. Like she's never going to see me in the mirror doing the 10 outfits. Like I explained before, she's never going to see me restricting food or being on a diet. And I was so hypersensitive to all the things I didn't want her to learn that I actually was still trying to control. Like I was still trying to control what she was seeing, what, here, have all the things, have all the food. You'll never see restriction in this house. And the truth of the matter is that as much as we as adults are trying to unlearn and get back to our innate knowledge, our kids have that. And so my job, I feel as a parent, is to trust and allow Lila to be an intuitive eater. Trust her hunger cues. You don't have to eat everything that's on your plate.
Right, right. Oh, I grew up with the clean plate club for sure.
Yeah. And if you have 5 bites and then you're hungry like an hour later or 20 minutes later, sometimes it would have been 15 minutes later, you're not being manipulative. Like you just weren't hungry. You don't know your satiety. You don't know when you're completely full yet, or you do, and now you're hungry again. Like my job is just to get out of the way and allow her to be an intuitive eater.
Interesting. And it's so, it's such a shift. It really is. And I love that when you are saying like, it's an unlearning. It is. Mm-hmm. It's an unlearning of what we have accepted, unquestioning, right? These norms, like, oh, that's normal. And I can definitely say that I've been in groups, and I know we have listeners that are male and female. And this is not necessarily exclusively for women, but there has a tendency that more women navigate these waters. So yes, everybody's included in the conversation, but I think it's hard for me not to talk about it from a woman's perspective, just because I happen to be one. But it is interesting how much of conversations of women coming together are around food or dieting or what looks good or doesn't look good, or like you said, like, is this hanging over? Is that sticking out? And when you sit back and you're an observer to it, and that's what our kids are. I can't imagine like how that would be interpreted by them.
Yeah, I can't feel. And I made a non-negotiable commitment to no gossip about my own body, no gossip about other people, no complaining about my body, not talking about the diet that I was on. I have to tell you, there was minimal conversation, and I'm not even joking about that. Like there really was. I learned how to listen so well, because every time I went to open my mouth, I'd be like, nope, can't say that. I'm not going there. There was a lot of silence. I think that's probably how I actually learned how to meditate, because there was a lot of silence for a while.
Oh gosh, that's really funny. That's really funny.
Yeah.
But Kierstin, you make a good point. And that's something else I would encourage everyone who's listening to explore. Like, what are your commitments that you make to yourself, right? Not the food rules, not the expectations, not the shoulds, but like the actual commitment that you make to yourself. And is that something that you would want to say out loud? Like, I'd be proud to say, like, you know what, I made a commitment to not gossiping or judging other people. And I'm working through it, right? I'd be proud to say that. So like, what are those commitments that we make to ourselves, and what does it take for us to actually follow through? And I love that you were, challenged in them when you're like, oh, nope, can't say that. Can't say that. Well, what am I actually going to be talking about? Wow. Like, I didn't even realize how much of that conversation just dominated the way that I even connected with other people.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I said I would never be a health coach, because how talk about food all the time? I don't,
Mm.
right? And health, the food that we put on our plate is actually just a little tiny part of it. Everything that's off of our plate is really where our health and wellness comes from. Our relationships, the way we talk to ourselves, the things that bring us joy, our social life, our career, that doesn't go on our plate. The food's actually just a small portion. So when I got clear on the fact that there was actually so many other things to talk about and focus on that aren't on my plate, that's when I really started to feel healthy. It was actually when I stopped being concerned or trying and focusing on getting to my ideal weight. When I put that off my radar, that I actually hit my ideal weight, right? That I don't even call it my ideal weight anymore. It's just the weight and size that my body knows it needs to be naturally. And I just got in the way of that for so long, trying to be perfect.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. You make a good point. There's so much more life to live outside of what's on our plate. And why do you think it is that people perseverate and focus so much on image and what's on their plate and calories? Like, why do you think we spend so much effort and energy and focus on that? And we sometimes, like, does that come at a cost of like not paying attention to the other things that are going on?
100%, it comes at a cost to not paying attention. And I think that there's two reasons why we get so focused on it. The first one is we can't control many things in our life, right? A lot of our control is like a perception that we can, and it's just not true. However, we can control what we put in our mouth. And so a lot of times when we feel out of control, food is a way to feel a sense of control. That's like a whole nother podcast though. And I do think that that's a big reason of why we focus on food so much. And then the other reason is, like I said in the beginning, is that diet culture feeds our insecurities. So you're not going to be loved if you don't look a certain way and fit into these jeans. You're a failure if you do a diet and you don't keep the weight off. So here, try this product. You aren't going to have fun and nobody's going to like you if you don't fit into a size 4 dress in 5 days to the dinner party you're going to. It just feeds on our insecurities of not being good enough and trying to fix ourselves. And I talk all the time in my coaching, like, this is not about fixing, it's about healing.
Oh, it's beautifully said. It isn't about fixing. It's about healing. It is. It's about healing. And I'm with you. It's probably a whole other podcast to talking about the control aspect, but you did touch upon it. So I do want to leave it into the conversation for people who are listening right here, right now. Because Kierstin, you're making a really good point. It's like, why do we focus on something like it's a plate of food? It's a plate of food, right? Supposedly. But where does the control aspect weave in when it comes to our food choices and our internal dialogue?
Yeah. So, one is our lack of ability and not being taught how to handle our emotions. So we're trying to control our emotions and we can't control our emotions. Like, that's just not possible. So instead we control food and our intake. And, like in school, we're taught math, reading, science, social studies. We are not taught how to relate ourselves and we are not taught how to feel. We don't talk about our emotions in school. So we don't learn that growing up. So we find coping mechanisms. And the other piece of that is that back to diet culture, it really doesn't want us to have our own power, wants us to look for external resources to be who we want to be. And all the shoulds, you brought up like the should statements, instead of just having the answers. We already have the answers. And if everybody knew we had the answers, we wouldn't buy anything. We wouldn't buy anything. I mean, we would, but it would be way less, and people ask me all the time, because like, I still have a way that I eat. Like, I'm gluten-free, I'm dairy-free. But to me, that's not a way of controlling anymore. It's not a way of fixing anymore. From that, don't have eczema anymore. From that, I don't have migraines anymore. I, don't have stomach aches after every time that I eat. And so back to like the controlling factor and being one way completely anti-diet and one way completely body positive, I think there's like, people get confused, and you can still have food preferences and food choices. The difference is nobody's telling me how to do it, and I figured it out from trusting my body, releasing the control. Diet culture doesn't want that.
No. And you make a good point before. It's about that intuition. And I think that intuition almost gets poo-pooed as like, oh yeah, that's super woo-woo, but that intuitive eating, what feels good for your body. I maintain a gluten-free diet, and actually it's been, about 15 years that I've been gluten-free. And it's interesting because I went gluten-free because of my arthritis, and it causes so much inflammation in my body, and my body doesn't like that. So then I can't function. And in many ways, like, I think intuitive eating and listening to your body is a divine act of like self-care and self-love. Right? We talk so much about like self-care. You're getting your monthly massage, or you're getting your nails done, which is all that stuff is good and fun. But like, are you actually like listening to how your body wants to be fed?
Right.
And checking in on that. Cause I'm with you. Like, if after every meal that I had a stomach ache, like, that doesn't feel like I'm listening to my body.
Right. Yeah. And then the other controlling piece, I think, comes from comparison and trying to fit in. So, there is no one size fits all diet or way of eating. When I say diet now, I don't even mean like the fad diets. When I say diet now, I just mean the food that you choose to put into your mouth.
Sure.
But there's no one way, no quick fix for every single body. What works for you may not work for me. Yet in our culture and our society here, it's like, oh, well, what are you doing? Let me try. Oh, you're doing the Whole30. I'm going to do the Whole30. Let me see if that works. Or, you're not eating gluten. Well, then everybody should not eat gluten. That's just not the case.
Well, but do you think that it goes to our biological? Because I like jamming with Kierstin, because she also has a background in mental health as well. And so do you think that it goes back to our like biological wiring, that as human beings, we have a need to belong? So, oh, you're doing Whole30, I'll do Whole30. Oh, you're this, I'll do that too. Do you think it goes back to like us wanting to be picked for the kickball team, as wanting to belong?
100%. Of course. Yeah. We're hardwired for connection. That's just the way that it is. So if everybody else is doing it, well, let me see if I can do it.
Right.
For sure.
Right.
For sure.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go.
No, I know. See, I just get so excited, but, and I think the reason I get so excited is because it's an important conversation that needs to just be out there. And when we're not talking about it, right, whether it's talking about feelings or talking about diet culture or mindset, like when we're not talking about it, we're almost make it taboo to talk about it. And So then, going back full circle to the conversation, like, what are we teaching our kids? Right?
Yeah.
Oh, that
Yeah.
we don't talk about that. Right. I mean, that's a whole different podcast about like money, but like, oh, we don't talk about money. Oh,
Hmm.
we don't talk about size, or oh, we don't talk about what we eat. Like, let's talk about it.
Yeah. I actually just took a CEU for my social work license, and it was on disordered eating and body image. And she kept saying the word fat. And she was like, this needs to be a normalized word. It's not a bad word. It's not something bad. It's not like, oh, we don't say fat, right? Because it's the meaning that we've attached to it.
Oh,
That
absolutely.
right?
Right.
It's not talk. And the same thing with skinny, there's
Hmm.
a meaning attached to it. So with, Lila and being around her, I find myself, when she makes a statement about her body, I go into fix it mode and have to stop myself, because I want to be like, no, 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 you're beautiful. And I like want to fix everything, because I can say that in this house, we try our best to not have diet culture, but like there's a world outside of this house, and I am not perfect by any means. Like it still comes out of my mouth sometimes. And then the thing though is that I hear it now. Like I can catch
Right.
myself in those
Right.
moments. And then I'm
Awareness.
like, woohoo, I celebrate the fact that I notice it and I'm not just in autopilot all the time.
Right.
So it opens up a lot of amazing conversations. And what I'm realizing is that if I just listen, Nyla gets the answer herself. It's like,
Right.
again, full circle back to like, she knows. I
Right.
just need to step away. And I'd say the other thing, Bailey, I just want to really touch on this because I think this is important back to the connection piece.
Hmm.
When you change the way you eat, because food is social, right? You go to a friend's house, where do you hang out? It's a kitchen
Right.
party.
Oh, inevitably. Sure. We're all in the
Yeah.
kitchen. Yes.
I mean, when I stopped eating dairy, I was like, what am I going to do when people come over? What am I going to make? Cheese and wine was like, that's the thing. Nobody's going to want to come to my house because
Sure.
I'm not eating cheese and wine. Of course, I serve it to other people, but people always have questions. This is dead serious. I lost some friendships when I stopped eating the way that didn't make me feel good.
Mm.
She's boring, oh my God, we'd be at a restaurant. Oh my God, Kierstin's ordering again. This is going to take forever with all my requests. And that's like a whole nother level of, I had to step into my power with that too.
Right. It's
And not
shaming.
listen. Yeah. And not listen to my own narrative or their narrative about, oh, well, she's always on a diet. This is just another fad diet.
Right.
So the
Right. Right.
connection piece, when you shift, and I think this happens with, this isn't just around food and again, what you put on your plate. When you make shifts in your primary food, everything that's off of your plate, and you really step into your power, I think that there's going to be people that support that. And there's going to be people that it may make uncomfortable. And
Right.
that's okay. That's
Right.
okay, because they'll either come around when they're ready or they won't.
Right.
And
And I think it
that's one of the
also,
things
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's one of the other main things I talk about in my coaching is toxic free living isn't just about the chemicals that you choose to put in
Mm.
your body or not put in your body, or the skin products. Like I'm all for that. I like geek out over that. I love finding products that are all the things free. And though having toxic relationships is so detrimental, like way more detrimental than what I'm putting on my skin.
Absolutely. Kierstin, like, I couldn't have said it better. 100%. Toxic free living. You're right. It's like, sure, it's the products, and it's our influences, it's who we're spending our time with. And I often say, and I'm sure you've heard me say it 1,000 times, like a rising tide lifts all ships. And I do believe that we are, who we surround ourselves with. Well, we're not responsible for other people. Maybe some other people that you're around are like, actually, like, you're choosing not to gossip. It feels really good for me. Like, actually, I don't want to join in to shit talking other people, right? Like,
Yeah.
or myself for that matter. And yeah, and so, well, one of my groups of friends in particular, like, when we get together, it's all about like, what are you making happen in the world? Like, what impact are you making? Like, how can we help? How can we influence? How can we share? How can we give? How can we, bring together resources? It's all of that. And it's almost like, when you were a kid and you were like putting your hand on top of the next person's hand, but not in a one-upsmanship kind of way. It was just like all of our energy just keeps growing. And it feels so good, as opposed to like, does my ass look fat in this? Or like, oh, you're going to have dessert? I don't know. I mean, like, I've got that reunion next week, so I don't know if I should. Just like, let's eat the damn cake. Is it homemade? Sweet. I'll have two. Like, let's bring it on. And I'm going to enjoy it and savor it for where we're at right now. But when we're surrounding ourselves with people that are toxic, or that like really, bring out our negative narrative, you're right. Like, it's also about detoxing that aspect of our life. Oh my gosh, I love having Kierstin on, and I love this conversation because we've covered the spectrum from, the influences that we have in our life, to the way that we're speaking to ourselves, to the fact that we are raising future people, right? Well, they're people right now, but we're raising, people who are looking and paying attention to what we're doing. And also the unlearning, right? That unlearning of what we've accepted as normal for so stinking long. And it's like, actually, that's not for me, and choosing to opt out. Like, I think we've covered the spectrum, and it's so important because you're right. It goes right back to our beliefs and our feelings, and creating a really healthy relationship with those. Yeah.
Beautifully said.
Awesome. Oh, Kierstin, I could jam with you all day. Thank you so much for coming on and hanging with us today, and really just spearheading this important conversation that's not only important for ourselves, but for our kids as well.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right. So for further conversations with Kierstin, where are you hanging out on the World Wide Web? Where can we find you?
Sure. On Instagram, it's Kierstin.Gant.FNC. That's where I'm primarily hanging out. I have a Facebook group. It's called Fear to Fierce Wellness. So that's a community that you can definitely jump into. If you have any specific questions about this podcast, or want to talk about all things diet culture, health, wellness, anything, you can email me at Kierstin@fearNOT
Awesome. We're going to put all the notes in there. And I know that you have a gift for everybody for your smoothies, right?
Yes. So I have, especially navigating through the holiday season, I feel like it's always good to have something in your back pocket when you're rushing around. So my favorite smoothies. I also 5 guided meditations to reduce stress.
Oof, we all need that.
my favorite, you're talking about skin products and detoxing. I wanted to share my clean skincare guide, so that you can also maybe do some stocking stuffers with it, and share it as well.
I love it because it's both our mindset and the way that we treat ourselves. So thank you so much for being part of it. And then anybody who wants to check out Kierstin's podcast, and she's also had me on as a guest of the podcast. Tell them about the podcast and where they can listen in.
Sure. It's Well To You Podcast, and it's at Well To You Podcast on Instagram. And we talk about all things health, wellness, body image, disordered eating, diet culture, everything. We dive deeper into what we talked about today.
I love it. I love it. And I always love the opportunity to continue the conversation. So we are going to put everything in the show notes so you guys can continue the conversation. Check out smoothies, check out meditations, check out the clean skin, and make sure that we are keeping our lives toxic free, from the things that we put into our body to the things that we put into our mind and our heart. So thank you so much for joining me for today.
Thanks, Bailey.